So I remember that leaving the MTC, I did not want to leave. I wanted to stay in the MTC forever. I loved it so much. But I get out to the field, and it was a long flight. Went through LA, Hong Kong to Jakarta. And when I got there, I remember getting out, and have my suit jacket on, and it's about a bajillion degrees. It is super humid. And so I'm walking out, and I was the last one of my MTC group through customs. Meet the mission president. I'm the last one, and he says, "Elder King, welcome to Indonesia." And he's this big Australian guy. And the first thing he said to me after that was, "Go ahead and take that suit jacket off. It's too darn hot for those here." But he's Australian, so they don't use darn or heck there. So it was pretty funny, and I was just, okay, well, and just kind of shocked at what was going on. But it was amazing, all the people that were just crowded around the airport, just waiting. It was really my first taste of a culture outside of the U.S. So it was super unique to me, just being bombarded with sensations, just having all these things to look at, new smells, new sounds, like a language that you thought you knew in the MTC, but you had no idea what it actually was. It was an insane first step off the plane. It was great. So the church it came to Indonesia in about 1970, and it's kind of a slow growth. And the mission is technically all of Indonesia, so that's about as wide as the U.S., the contiguous U.S. It's a huge geographic mission, probably 300 million people in Indonesia. And when I was there, 2015, Elder Holland came, and he dedicated Timor-Leste, which is not a part of Indonesia, but he dedicated it for service missionaries, for the preaching of the gospel, really. And so the church there is still fairly small. It hasn't grown a lot since 1970. Right now there are 2 stakes, which we were super excited to work with the stake presidents and such, but it has 1 district, and the 2 stakes in the district are all on the island of Java, which is the main island. But there are 3 other branches on 3 different islands, just separate. So one's in Sumatra, one's in Sulawesi, and one is in Bali. And so there are missionaries everywhere except for Bali. So it's still fairly small. But now we're starting to see 3rd generation members pop up. The ones who are faithful are super faithful. They're incredible members. Just great examples to me as a person, as a follower of Christ. And other than that, it's a very different aspect, because I'd say Indonesia is to Muslims as Utah is to Mormons. So it's just a totally different atmosphere than what members of the church are used to, where you're surrounded in a non-Christian religion. So it's the members who are there, they have learned to really hold fast to the testimonies that they have. And it's just a great thing to see. Most branches there usually have 80 to 100 members in a branch. Or in a ward branch. That's pretty common. Some of the biggest we had up to 120, 130, but normally it was a lot smaller. And even some branches, they have 20 members or 30 members that show up every week. And so a lot of times when you get to know a ward, you know every single person, you know all the children, everyone you can work with. And so for me, it was like I was able to get really close with the members there. As for specific things of Indonesia, missionaries aren't allowed to proselyte door to door, so they're not allowed to knock doors, which was something that, since I had been with missionaries in the U.S., I'd kind of followed them around. I understood, oh, we knock doors, but there we weren't allowed to, and that was really weird for me trying to adjust. Okay, then how do I do missionary work? Because I'd always thought of it as you knock doors. But then we had to get member referrals. We had to talk to everyone we saw, and it was a lot. It was really different than what I was expecting, honestly. And As for the religious climate there, it's mostly Muslim, so it's really anyone you talk to. So we'd say, hi, we're missionaries. We have a message about Jesus Christ, or we have a message about eternal families, or whatever we wanted to share with them. And they would say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm Muslim. And we respected that. And that was something that we had to say, okay, they're not interested, but hey, is there anything we can do for you? So it's a sensitive religious climate, and that goes for almost any religion there. But we'd meet people, the Muslims were the most hospitable, the most friendly people that I've ever met. They'd see you on the street and you'd be sweating, and they'd say, oh, come in, have a seat in the shade, and here's a drink of water, and can I get you any food? And the very poor people, but they would give you anything to help you. And so it was really interesting to me, and we'd talk to them and they'd say, oh yeah, I'm Muslim, but I think you guys are great. I'm glad you're serving God. I'm glad you're trying your best to help others. And to me it was like a shock that, oh my gosh, the church doesn't have a corner on the market of goodness. There's goodness everywhere. There's goodness in every single religion, and that's something that they taught me. And so we would do our best to invite others to come unto Christ, and we'd also do our best to help ourselves come unto Christ by respecting and being tolerant and loving the people that we were around. The missionary work is totally different in every city because every city is so different. Jakarta is very urbanized. It's got a lot of buses. And if I could go back to Jakarta, I'd say, open your mouth, all times, all places. And I think that's one of my favorite memories is I was with my district and we were headed back from a zone conference, and I remember we were on this train, and the train is super tightly packed, enough that if you lift your foot, there's no longer a place for your foot to set it down. It's just incredibly packed. And I just remember my companion, he turned and he started talking to someone. And then I turned, I started talking to someone. And then the other members of this district, they all turned and they were talking to someone. And we were all just talking to people, getting to know them, teaching the gospel, inviting them. And it was way cool because after a little while, I look around and we have the entire train is just staring at, listening to us. Like they're just trying to, what are these guys talking about? What is this? And so it was just a super cool experience, and it taught me, I'd go back and I'd try and open my mouth as much as I possibly humanly could in Jakarta. As for other cities, there are other cities where, since you can't knock doors, then one thing we would do is we go to the neighborhood boss. I don't know how else to put it, and it's called an RT. And this RT, he knows everyone's business. He knows who they are, where they live, what religion they are. He knows their work, their kids, knows everything about them. And that's kind of his job. And so we'd go to him and we'd say, hey, do you know any Christians around here we could share the gospel with? And he says, oh, well, I'm not Christian, but I know this neighbor is. Could we ask for his name? Would you be okay with that? And he'd say, oh yeah, sure. That's Pak Joko, and he lives over there, and why don't you give him a visit? Or here, I'll show you to his place, and introduce us. And we'd talk to that guy, and we'd ask if we could, we'd ask him about his family, about his religion, how he feels, and then we'd invite him to learn more about the gospel. And it was an interesting way of going about doing it, but for sure the thing I would do more if I could go back is opening my mouth. And that was one thing that I really learned to appreciate while I was serving in Jakarta and cities like that. Indonesia, there's a lot of people who have problems with smoking, and that's just a really common thing, that it's a social thing that they do. And so it was always difficult to get them to quit smoking or quit drinking tea. Usually if you said, oh, quit drinking alcohol, most of them accept that pretty readily, because especially Muslims, they believe it's haram, that it's forbidden. You shouldn't be drinking alcohol anyway. So it's very rare to find people who actually drink alcohol. But tea, smoking, that was usually a problem. And that's one thing. Another thing I love about the Muslim people is they're very chaste people. And so, yes, they have problems with law of chastity like everyone, but one thing that I appreciated is that they, very rarely would I find someone who had a problem with being immoral. And if I did, it was usually someone who had an issue with pornography. So that was something that I really appreciated about them, is that they were very chaste, they very wholesome people. And it was a nice missionary atmosphere. So I served from 2014, January 15th, to 2015, December 16th. So roughly 23 months. They kicked me out because my visa expired, but that's okay. And I served in, my first city was called Bekasi, and that's a little suburb of Jakarta. And my second city was Solo, which is in the middle of Java. Third city was Bogor, which is a city south of Jakarta. My fourth city was actually in Jakarta, and my fifth city was called Manado. And that's clear on a 3-hour plane ride away from Jakarta, up closer to the Philippines.